Hi, my name's Matt Locke, and this is the Everyday Athlete Podcast, the podcast for the everyday athletes around the world who refuse to be average and who want to create a legacy of health, fitness, and achievement in every aspect of their life. I'm glad you're here, and once again, it's time to forge your future. Jayson, welcome to the Everyday Athletes Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on here. How are you doing at your end?
Thanks, Matt. It's great to be here. I'm doing great.
And
Winter's here, but we're hanging in there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And tell us, whereabouts in the world are you?
I am just outside of Calgary, Alberta, up in Canada.
Yeah, beautiful. And I know that you and I talked about it when we first chatted. The scenery behind you. Tell us quickly, for those who are watching this on YouTube, what the scenery is about behind you.
So this is the view outside my office. I'm not in my office right now, but when COVID forced us out of our office, I took a view outside my window, and this is my backdrop. So at least when I'm on Zoom all day, it somewhat feels like I'm in my home space.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm guessing that's a cityscape of Calgary, where your office is based. Yeah,
that's right.
Beautiful. Looks beautiful. I'm glad that when you took the photo, the sun was shining, just for those listening on the podcast.
But, I do have a couple photo options. So one on a cloudy day, one on a sunny day. So
depends on your mood. No, very good. So, yeah, look, you're a leadership strategist who likes to help businesses disrupt and accelerate a new breed of meaningful leadership. And I'm keen to dive into that a little, in a few minutes. But first, if you could just tell us a little bit about your background. And you've got quite an interesting background, and we're really excited to share that with the listeners.
Yeah, it really my passion for high performance. I played American football, and when I transitioned from American football and somehow found myself in the crazy sport of bobsled, winter sport, racing around tracks. And funny enough, I just stepped into bobsled. I went to a camp to become a better football player because I heard bobsled was great training for power and speed. And here I was, I tested well, I got scooped up into a team, and it turned into an 8-year career.
Wow. That's amazing, isn't it, how these things work? But I guess, here in Australia, joining a bobsled team isn't something you'd naturally think of doing, but it makes more sense where you are in the world, of course.
It is, but funny enough, one of Canada's best bobsled pilots for the last few Olympics is an Aussie.
Right, there you go.
He started his bobsled career with the Australian bobsled team, and then became a Canadian citizen.
Oh, fantastic. Look, I'm interested that wasn't only that was an unexpected transition to an 8-year career, which was amazing, and a successful career at that. But as well, that kind of paved the way for what you do now, didn't it?
Yeah, one of the great things is being on tour. Sometimes I'd leave home for 6 weeks, 2 months at a time. You'd have a hockey bag full of clothes, and then I'd bring a massive bag of books. And when you're on tour, you train, you compete, but then a lot of the idle time I would just consume book after book. And there was another athlete on the U.S. team who became a great friend, was one of the best men at my wedding. He was competing at the same time, and we would talk about the principles that we were exposed to as athletes. And we'd also both read up on the latest science. And when we were competing, and after I retired, we kept speaking about, like, how do we get these principles out into a digestible format that can help leadership in business? And that's really where the seeds were planted. Steve went on, Steve Messler is his name. He went on to win a gold medal at the Vancouver Olympics in 2010. And then we sort of embarked on this journey.
Yeah, which is an incredible journey. Now, I know that that journey's included authoring a couple of books, the first being 52 People, Connecting with Life Through Strangers. And I know that your business, you're the founder at Level 52. I'm intrigued to know what the 52 relates to, actually.
You might have heard this statement: you overestimate what you can do in a day, and you underestimate what you can do in a year.
Yep.
And with Level 52, we employ video game mechanics as a principle for to help leaders understand that If you're a leader in business, it's because you've likely been a high achiever, and so you expect so much out of yourself. Well, level 52 is simply when we're working with leaders, let's help you identify the areas that you want to enhance your performance in, and let's create a year-long roadmap. If every week you seek to up-level this skill, just micro progress over 52 weeks will get you to level 52 in a year. And so it's about giving them a structured format to focus on what's important, to just make those micro up levels every week.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Absolutely. Thank you. That was something that had piqued my interest, especially having seen the title of your first book. And look, the book that, congratulations on your second book, which is at the time of recording this, about to go live to the world, The Science Behind Success. There's a common theme here. If you could just talk to us about what the intention of the Science Behind Success book is, who's it aimed at, and what are the overarching messages, let's say?
The initial reason for doing this is early on when Steve and I got into the consulting world, we noticed that leadership development was happening, but not a lot of leadership development impact was happening. People would show up for courses and they'd go through the motions, and then what would inevitably happen? They'd get sucked back into the vortex of meetings and emails, and all the time and money that they spent was simply wasted. And so we thought, like, how do we make leadership development better? And part of the barrier that we saw was, how do you make leadership make sense, where it's not just this fluffy, nebulous concept that's full of soft skills that don't work, but how do you give the scientific underpinnings as an entry point so that they can embrace their leadership and see it in a different way?
Yeah, sure. No, absolutely. And I love the logic behind the science behind success and its creation. I'd be really interested to hear your take on what leadership is, maybe just to calibrate us and the audience, but also you have the term meaningful leadership. And again, that's something that when I was doing my homework before we chatted, that was like, I'm actually intrigued to dig into what that actually means. And leadership often is, certainly in a larger organization, it's almost dictated by hierarchy. And I think that's, you're in a leadership position. That doesn't mean that you're leading or a leader. You're just in an organization chart by necessity to organize the structure of a business. But maybe let's start with how you would explain to someone what meaningful leadership is.
Let's start with flat out leadership.
Yes.
And in our programs, when we get groups together, one of the first things we do is, hey, what's your definition of leadership? And certainly when everyone starts sharing their definition of leadership, out of a group of 30 people, how many definitions are the same? None are identical.
Not many.
Yeah, exactly. There might be some things that have similarities, but this is exactly the point. Part of the problem is people pursue the definition of leadership when really part of meaningful leadership is them, by the end of their journey, that they can clearly define without a doubt what leadership is to them. And that's what matters. Intentionality, clarity around the impact you want to have, the way you want to lead, that's meaningful leadership. You see, many people get thrust into a leadership position in business. Yep. They have power, budget authority. But if you're like me, you've seen many of those people, and the last thing you would consider them is leaders. They're experts who know how to manage a spreadsheet. And so part of this whole concept is waking up the sleepy subject matter expert to understand truly what is it to lead, what are the mechanisms to influence and engage people, and how do you look through a different lens to create a meaningful impact that transcends the budget, the P&L, and some of the intangible items.
Yeah, for sure. To answer your question, absolutely, I can relate. I 20 plus years in sort of senior corporate type roles, and absolutely the classic mistake, let's say it that way, that I certainly observed, which I think is pretty common, was that someone's done a really good, has done a particular job really well, and the natural expectation is that they then move up the ladder, let's say, the next rung of the ladder. And at some stage, for sure, that means into some sort of leadership position. But that doesn't mean they're in any way equipped to be in that position. And it may be that actually they don't even enjoy that position and what the responsibilities and the requirements of those jobs actually demand, let's say. And I've seen some very unhappy people in leadership positions where actually either they have moved themselves or have been moved back into a different style of role, one that's not got the leadership weight around it. And yeah, they thrive again, literally thrive again. And yeah, I'm certainly intrigued by the meaningful leadership. I actually love that. I wonder how you, I mean, it's, I can speak from experience taking a room full of leaders and getting the baggage left at the door to a point where you can then have some good open learning that has impact. It's not always so easy. Sometimes the egos have to get checked at the door.
So here's how we frame it. And it creates context around what the science behind success is. And we start by giving an example and telling the story of Ignaz Semmelweis. If you're familiar with that story, Ignaz Semmelweis in the 1800s saw a problem. Too many women were dying when they were giving birth inside of clinics at the time. In fact, a significant amount of women were dying while giving birth in clinics compared to when they would be with midwives. He obsessed over the problem, found a repeatable solution, and then published his findings. His publications were mocked. He was ostracized from the community and committed to an insane asylum. What was the preposterous conclusion that he made? All physicians had to do was wash their hands. Now, his findings were later confirmed by Louis Pasteur in the germ theory. But why we frame that to introduce the science behind success? One, good science, and there's bad science. Bad science is the validation of your own ideas and your ego. Whereas science at its purest is the pursuit of greater understanding. And so if you imagine as an expert in a business, oftentimes you're seeking to validate your ideas and appraise things based on what you knew. Yep. But in this case, here's the irony, and it relates to responsibility. The irony in this situation is these physicians that rejected Semmelweis's hypothesis, ironically, were the ones infecting the situation they were trying to solve. And so we ask every leader, if you want to make this a productive journey in our program, first you have to understand and examine that many of the situations that you're trying to solve are the ones that you might be infecting right now.
Yeah, brilliant. And confronting, I'm guessing. And what's the general response to that?
Well, we haven't had anyone drop out of the programs yet.
I'm assuming there's obviously an understanding and acceptance of the validity of the example given, but it's often hard to then look in the mirror and see yourself, with a similar example, different subject matter, but nonetheless.
It is, and it truly is the only productive place to stand from. If you're in the program and you want to develop, there are two qualities. If we boil it down, if there's an ideal leader that we want to work with, they embody two qualities. One, a hunger, and it's the same with an athlete. They have the hunger to be better, to make a bigger impact in their business with their team. They hunger for that high performance. Yep. And then the second H is humility. They understand that they don't have all the answers, nor do they have to. So if they're willing to show up vulnerable with humility, then that's where we can make great stuff happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm guessing a lot of that falls under the banner of mindset, huh? Here we're talking about a mindset, um, in this case of the leader, or the leaders in the program, who then go back out into the world and approach it maybe from a different angle. But the how do you help? I mean, mindset obviously is as relevant in business as it is in sport, as it in at play and at home. I mean, mindset really drives everything in our lives. And I'm interested to hear how in level 52, how you go about helping to reframe some of the key drivers for people's mindset to help them self-manage their mindset differently.
Yeah, everything cascades from your mindset. And we introduce it through our first pillar in the science behind success, and that's hypertrophy. We know hypertrophy as no pain, no gain.
Yep.
But the real definition of hypertrophy is that when a muscle is subjected to stress or resistance, it adapts by growing. And that's at the physiological level, but it also happens at the psychological level. When we're subjected to stress or resistance, we adapt by growing. And so we introduce Carol Dweck's mindset, growth and fix, but really we take it deeper and introduce two principles around the mindset for leaders. One is meaningful masochism. Great leaders are meaningful masochists. The same way great athletes are meaningful masochists. They deliberately engage in the pain on the path towards the vision that inspires them.
Yeah, absolutely. No, direct parallels for sure. That sounds very powerful. I mean, this is did you say it was a 12-month program? I'm wondering.
12 weeks.
12 weeks. Okay. So, and you start with mindset, and I guess that is necessary because it forms the foundation of everything else that is to come.
And we start with mindset for a couple of reasons. One, so that they can reorient and reframe around the pains in their environment. It's inherent that there is going to be pain and turbulence. You're working with people, and people are challenging, quirky, and unpredictable. And so reframing all of the pains in your environment is important. And so one of the things that we have leaders do is break it down into what we call a CSP inventory. Imagine 3 columns. Give you permission to list out all of the petty complaints and irritations you have. Everything from Matt doesn't clean up the dishwasher in the staff room to so-and-so shows up late to they're always on their phone in meetings, like all of the irritations and complaints. And then you go through the column and list out all of the pains, the stressors that keep you up at night. These are often the unanswered questions. And then the last one are those real hard, deep pains, the ones that shook the foundation of you and your professional career, often that have regrets, things that you didn't do. And when you list these out, you can see, oftentimes those complaints and irritations unaddressed will compound and grow into more nasty ailments. The stressors are simply problems to be solved, and the pains are your wisdom. Like these are your battle scars that then you can leverage moving forward.
Yeah, super powerful. And I'm guessing, I mean, out of a 12-week program, how long do you, round numbers, do you spend on mindset? How long do you find that it takes to get the participants ready to then receive the rest of the program and move on?
We spend about the first 3 weeks on elements of mindset that prepare them for a 360. When you talk about confronting,
yep.
We have a 360 that's designed to get the cold hard truth. Like, yes, we highlight some strengths, but also we highlight what are people irritated with, what are the things they wish you'd do differently, all of these things, so that you can get a clear snapshot as to what your brand is. We've all got a brand. Most people don't develop an intentional one, but you've got one. So what is the water cooler chat, and what do people say about you and the way you lead?
Excellent. And yeah, the water cooler chat. It's quite a good litmus test, isn't it? At the end of the day.
It is, you know, it's funny in the world that we live in today around like the world of the virus. Viral contagion has been a part of our model for 10 years, in that leaders have to understand that they are walking viruses. The words they speak, the actions they express operate in the same contagion cycles as a virus does. Everyone around you in your business is a susceptible host. And as a leader, you're a walking billboard that advertises how to be successful. So if you're an ass, if you react when people make mistakes, you're basically teaching people through behavioral contagion that this is how you be a successful leader here. And so when we frame that as context, people look at their 360 and they go, oh shit, what do I do to start meetings? What do I do in these situations? And that right there is the starting point where people can go, I want to be different.
Now, that leads, I guess we're talking here about influence as well, right? The influence that leaders have over for everyone they come into contact with at the end of the day, from whoever it is, wherever in the building they work, it makes no difference, and including external suppliers, third-party contractors and the like. And I know influence is certainly one of the, I mean, would you call it that one of the pillars behind the science behind success? And what do you try and impart around the topic of influence? So let's presume now we're 3 or 4 weeks into the 12-week program, and we now have a group of leaders who they've had their 360s. They've managed to reframe elements of their mindset, and they're ready to receive, let's say. How do you then introduce the idea of influence and how they can have positive influence in their environment?
We introduce it through the concept of memetics and behavioral contagion, that viral cycle.
Yep.
And we invite them to understand that you're always spreading viruses. There are viruses that create critical momentum towards your desired vision. And there are viruses that you spread that create cancerous downward spirals that physiologically make your people less resourceful and less productive. And then we introduce the concept of a brand. Just like any brand that we choose to engage with, from fashion to airlines, people operate the same way. They think things, they feel things, they say things, and they take actions based on how they experience us. Once we understand those building blocks of a brand, then we get leaders in the place of developing their intentional brand moving forward. If I'm with you in a difficult meeting, maybe we're peers and you don't even report to me, my intentionality as a meaningful leader is I'm going into this meeting with a specific impact I want to create. And when I walk out of this, even though you and me might not see eye to eye, I want you to be able to consistently describe me with 3 words: passionate, present, and this is my brand, by the way, passionate, present, and pushing the boundaries of what's possible. You may not love me, but you're going to consistently get the same me in our one-on-ones. And that's what we want the bar for our leaders, is to have that extreme intentionality.
Yeah, that's awesome. Absolutely. I've never actually thought about it that way, about the individual brand, I have to say. And that makes a lot of sense. And that also leads into one of the other pillars, of course, which is culture. I mean, the way the leaders behave and the influence they have ultimately helps to either change or create a desirable culture in a business. And unfortunately, a lot of business don't have great cultures. We know that. But some do. Some have an amazing culture. And I'd love to hear your thoughts around what helps to create a culture of high engagement, high performance, high energy. I'd love to hear your thoughts around that.
The third element of science that we introduce as the drawback for culture is to understand epigenetics. That there are all inputs that influence expression. And there are multiple layers of culture that a leader's responsible for to truly be a culture custodian. And the first culture that you have to own is your own. And the culture that we talk about is your skin covered petri dish that you walk to work with every day, which you think about the inputs. You may have heard the statement garbage in, garbage out, right?
That's
And
one
so,
version of it.
what's that?
That's one version of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And so your inputs, whether you look at your diet, sleep, your
Yep.
mindset, these all determine the way that I show up. And then guess what? That everything cascades from that. And so I bring inputs into my relationships, whether it's clear direction, inspiring message, empathetic listening. Like all of those inputs then inform our relationship, and everything cascades from there. Any organizational culture is the mosaic of these micro layers of culture. So when it comes to being a culture custodian, it's really understanding what are the inputs that we know create a desired expression. Organizationally, we all have our DNA, right? DNA is the same every day Matt and Jayson go to work. But yet here's the fascinating thing. If you look through a metaphorical lens of epigenetics, a caterpillar, cocoon, and butterfly have the same DNA, identical, but yet remarkably different expressions into the world. And so if you look at those three things in isolation, if you label them as the truth, you would always say that this DNA is either slow and sloppy, this DNA is shut off from the world in isolation, or this DNA is a brilliant expression. But there are days where you and me both show up slow and sloppy. What are those situations or conditions, or shut off, or a greater socialized expression? It's up to us as leaders to understand for ourselves, the individuals on our team and organization, how we get the greater expression. And it's all upstream actions, like the inputs that we're putting into our environment. I'll give you a specific example. How many businesses have you walked into that you see the values on the wall? Right? You see them on the front counter. But yet if I go into a meeting with an executive, I say, hey, what are the values of your organization? How many executives would squirm and go, and they might get one, right? It's a great example that a little input that can make a big difference are leaders that are custodians of the culture through always seeking ways to incorporate the values into their messages. You know, Matt, what you did right there is a great example of our value of collaboration or integrity. And if you make the values a part of your culture through weaving it and creating narratives about them, then you're going to start to see more of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you're describing takes a huge amount of intention. Certainly before it becomes a habit, let's say, before there's muscle memory wrapped around it. And you're right, as you said at the beginning of our chat, it's most common for management or leadership seminars and workshops and programs. In the moment, everyone's engaged and they're learning and their intentions are great. But upon return to the normal working environment, it rapidly becomes like running in syrup before there's a downward trajectory and it's back to life as normal. There's so much white noise going on. So how do you help delegates, the participants in your program, to create and maintain those intentions? Because that's the only way that lasting change will occur. And we talk about changing culture. It takes time and consistency to achieve that in any organization, large or small.
We know when someone isn't going to do something. You know, imagine in one of our sessions. Our sessions are like 2-hour virtual workouts, fast paced. They exercise something. And we always instruct them right after our session, try and have a one-on-one meeting with one of your team members or a colleague. Like just try and organize your schedule that way. And after a session, if someone has a big insight around a tool, a skill, we say, okay, when are you going to use this? And they go, all the time. Okay, well, that's an indicator that they're going to use it none of the time, right? It's helping them identify specific areas in their upcoming schedule that they can get the reps. And that's part of it, is part of by design why we have them set up a meeting right after. So then the discussion changes and we go, how specifically are you going to use this tool or skill in the meeting that's coming up? So now they can start to visualize, envision it, and immediately get reps and then reflect on their exercise. One of the greatest gifts that COVID has provided us, we used to do full day, multiple day training sessions. As soon as we broke it out into a 12-week program, 2 hours a week, the product got significantly better and the impact was far greater.
It's interesting, isn't it? How would you explain that? I'm not surprised by that, but is it just making it more condensed, more focused?
In my upcoming book, we speak about the forgetting curve, in that there's a reality that within 20 minutes, you've forgotten so much of the content that you absorb. Because if we just sit there in absorb mode, we have fleeting moments, we scribble notes, it's great, but we only have the capacity to remember so much. And so 3 days in a row, 2 days in a row, one full day, what do we tend to do in our world, in the learning and development world? Jam people full of content. It satiates them. They feel good. It's what they want, but it's not what they need. And so now by spreading it out, you have 2 hours every Tuesday or Wednesday, Thursday. You learn a specific tool, a deep dive. You find out how I apply it my way. And then you identify your rep opportunities before the next session. Practice makes perfect, permanent.
Yep. Absolutely. Interestingly, therefore, and let's pretend next week there was a 100% successful vaccine available for free to everyone on the planet. Just argument's sake, literally the results you've seen since COVID and changing the format of the program, you would retain that? You'd stay with that format on that basis?
We, moving forward, are a virtual leadership fitness company.
Yeah. And that's not a case of just trying to be pandemic proof. That's because you've seen better results.
Well, think about it from a business perspective, a value perspective. Pre-COVID, we were in Chicago, New York, Houston, San Francisco, Singapore, delivering work, putting miles on airplanes, carbon footprint, working with people in a geolocation. Whereas now you come into one of our sessions, you've got people from Google in San Francisco, the head office of Home Depot. You've got, like, in Atlanta, you've got people from all across the continent, the world, from different industries, different leaders. The collaboration, the network building, the sharing is just, it's so much more value.
And highly efficient.
For everyone.
Yeah, which I think is highly appreciated by everyone, or most people for sure. And look, I think pre-COVID, there was often the case, video conferencing, it's not the same as the real thing. You need to look someone in the eye and be able to shake their hand. And I was never, I'm very human-centric, no question. But that was never my experience with video calls. And I think now we have a world that, certainly a lot of the world that is now very, very well educated about how to live a life, let's say a working life, through literally through a different lens. And I can see how that would be highly effective, and certainly for our business the same. I mean, at the end of the day, yes, we have in-person events which we hope to continue with after the pandemic, but for sure we've been forced to take an element of it online, and without question there are advantages to that for everyone, not just from our side. The same philosophy works in a number of different business environments, but certainly when we talk about, and I'm conscious of time, when we talk about creating highly engaged environments, one of the observations we make here is with the Bay Games, for example, an in-person sports event, or even just our sort of daily training, which there's nothing that sexy or dignified about it. It's just training, but the camaraderie and team spirit that we all get from sweating, suffering, but smiling together. That creates some pretty magical bonds, bonds that you hear of from people maybe in defense or emergency services, those kind of bonds. And you take those same people and pop them in a business or a work environment, and many businesses struggle to recreate that same sense of camaraderie, team spirit, connection, collaboration. And I'd love to, as the close for us today, to hear your thoughts about how to create highly engaged environments so that it's not only the leaders, of course, the leaders are there trying to get every member of the team to flourish and to put their best foot forward and to create an environment where everyone wants to be there and they want to do their best for the common good.
If we really simplify it, clear goals, clear roles, like that's one of the things in sports. We know what the finish line is. We know what creates points. We know what my job is and what your job is. And those things, when we talk about elements of meaningful leadership, little things make the biggest difference. Where most people seek the magic bullet for engagement, for performance, meaningful leaders understand that it's always the littlest things that make the biggest difference. And so what everyone else steps over, seeking something more grand or technical, here's what meaningful leaders do. You and I start work today in a professional environment. Hey, Matt, let's get really clear. I'm going to write on this whiteboard what my job is and what your job is. I want you to do the same on that whiteboard. Let's take 5 minutes and then let's see where each other stack. And people who've worked together for 5-6 years, you'd be shocked at some of the things that they are completely looking at through different lenses. And so a simple rule, and this in itself can create engagement. It's, again, one of the first things we do in our programs. If I'm the facilitator and you're in my program, okay, what's my job as the facilitator? You tell me the job. I seek to get clear about what you mean. And I go, okay, what's your job? One of the things people always say is, my job is to be engaged. I go, okay, well, how would I know you're engaged? What would I see you doing? What would I hear you saying? What are the actions that you'd be taking? Okay, that's helpful. What do you want me to do if I don't see you doing those things? Like, these are all really simple things, Matt, but so effective. Now people are like, oh shit, exactly. This is what I have to do because I just said this is what my job is. And so now I'm just shining the mirror as to what you said you wanted to show up as. And so there's getting curious about it. And then like just a simple framework of let's get clear about whose job is what. That's one element. And there are many elements that make up a high-performing team. But if you start with this one, that in itself is going to make a big difference in a professional environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for such a clear answer. I appreciate it very much. Jayson, I could talk to you all day, and in your case, all night, but I am conscious of time. A great discussion, and I know that our audience are going to love every moment of it. And if they wanted to get in touch with you, or for sure, by the time this goes to air, the Science Behind Success book will be released. I know I'm on the waiting list already. Where would they go, and how would they get in touch with you, and how would they get a copy of the book and all the good stuff?
Yeah. They can find me. They can find all the work that we're up to at level52.ca.
Sure, good. And the book as well. Everything's there.
Yep, the book as well. Yeah.
Super simple. Excellent. Well, look, thank you again for being so generous with your time. I wish you the best of luck with, not luck, but any word that comes to mind with the success of your new book, and congratulations again with that. Appreciate you being you, and appreciate everything you're bringing to the world. And on that note, I'll bid you farewell and thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt. It's great to be here. Appreciate it.
Well, there you have it. Thanks very much for listening. And if you've enjoyed this, please go ahead, hit the subscribe button down below and the little bell icon so you get notified every time we upload a new episode. And if you think that one of your training buddies would also enjoy this, go ahead and share it with them right now. With that said, thank you once again. And as always, be brave, have fun, and lead by example.